Hello, this is Yayoi Komiyama from Brain to Belly, and welcome to the Spanglish World Networks on Zingo TV channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app on your respective app stores and iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. And Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku, and Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. So, hello. I have a special guest here today. Her name is Gilly Smith, and she is a food journalist, and she has been in journalism for over 30 years now. And I had met her probably in July through an interview, and we just connected on so many levels in terms of food and our thoughts on food. And she has also published several books. One of them is Taste and TV Chefs. So we can pick her brain on that a little bit. And she is also a podcaster, and she has been in the podcasting world for a while now, I think over 20 years now. So welcome, Gilly. And wow, I'm very excited to have you here.
Well, me too. I mean, that intro of yours, Yo-Yo, I mean, I feel like we're in some kind of future world. I have no idea what you're talking about, these Roku Fire Sticks and stuff. I've never been on a YouTube channel in my life, and I've been in journalism a while. So yeah, all of that. I'm just soaking it all up. It's lovely.
Well, I'm just excited that I got you on this show because, this is it's globally because of Roku and Fire Sticks and
Amazing.
Amazon. It's globally broadcast to members of the Spanglish World Network community and other channels that Eduardo has on this. And yeah, we reach quite a number of people
You
globally,
do.
and yes, and it's wonderful that we can share our messages across the globe, and I mean through Facebook we do get quite a bit, but this is a little bit more, and it's interesting. It's very interesting. And you're in the UK, I'm in New York, and that alone is like, only in this day and age can we do something like
I
this
know. I know.
without it being like a big production. I
Yeah.
remember because I might show my age when I say this, but I remember when I was growing up, it was only in big TV stations that they had these worldwide broadcasts and whatever.
Yeah.
And now we can do this from anywhere pretty much, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it is
And
amazing. It's
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yes.
I
And
mean, COVID actually changed all that for
oh,
me. You
yes.
talk about age, which you should never apologize for. Yeah, you're right. But
Yes.
anyway, I remember wanting to interview somebody in New York for my podcast just before COVID, and he couldn't get here, and I just didn't know how I wasn't going to. I'd stopped flying, and so I had to give it up. And then COVID happened, and then I thought,
Right.
hang on, I could do this on Zoom, and I learned how to do it, and I reached out to him and I got him, and we had the most amazing connection. And once I'd got him, I realized I could get anyone in the world. That
Yes.
was a defining moment.
Oh, yes. And something it's wonderful how humans can become innovative and resourceful when we're pushed, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, or seize the opportunity.
Yes, yes,
It's great. It's really
yes,
great.
yes. So, Jilly, can you tell? I know that you were also an editor for Delicious Magazine for a
No,
while,
not
or
an
no?
editor. I
No.
ran their
Oh,
their podcast.
oh, oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
wow, wow. So you must have had some interesting conversations in that podcast. I'm
Oh my
wondering.
God. I mean,
Yes.
so for anyone who doesn't know, Delicious is one of the biggest food magazines in Britain.
Yes.
It started off as an Australian one, which was huge in Australia. So it
Mm-hmm.
is the definitive. If you're a real foodie, you'll be reading Delicious magazine,
Magazine. Yes.
um, or BBC Good Food magazine. It's kind of on that level, yeah. So
Wow. Wow.
so when they asked me to do their
The podcast.
podcast, and it was the first food podcast, really.
Wow.
And nobody really knew what to do with it. They just thought they should have it. I was given carte blanche and immediately access to everyone in the food world.
Wow.
And of course, because delicious is delicious, everybody said yes. All the
Of course.
publishers said
Yes.
yes to their authors, all the TV said yes to their, stars. I was in it, I mean, literally in everyone's homes. It
Wow.
opened
Wow.
the door to everyone. I mean, I'd been doing food for a long time by that time, and I'd interviewed
Hmm.
a fair few people. But this just gave me a little black book from heaven.
Oh, yes, I know. I was reviewing your profile, and I remember seeing like all these famous, TV chefs like Nigella Lawson and Jamie Oliver, and I'm like, oh my God. Oh, for me, it would be like, oh my God, because all I see is that I've seen them on TV, and I'm like, they were amazing, and I'm like, wow, Jilly got to talk to these people
Well,
and pick their
going back to
brains.
that
Yeah.
story about COVID,
Mm-hmm.
Dan Barber, I got Dan Barber, who is Obama's favorite chef, in
Ah,
upstate New York,
yes.
Bluestone Barns. During COVID, I thought, who do I most want to
Yes.
have on the show? And this was for my own show after
Mm-hmm.
Delicious. And I thought, well, I'll ask Dan Barber. He, like everybody else, is stuck in COVID, lockdown. Well,
Yes.
I'll have that. And, similarly, sort of, Ira Glass on This American Life is like, I'll have him. Everybody's just stuck in their
That's
little
true.
rooms. And yeah, so everyone's saying yes. So
Wow.
yeah, no, absolutely. No, I do get access. Yeah.
Yes, that's wonderful. Now, may I ask you, what got you interested in food journalism to begin with?
Well, as with all these stories, they're only told in retrospect.
Yes.
I, like every journalist, well, I suppose those who kind of go and work for a newspaper or a TV
Mm-hmm.
company or whatever won't make it up as they go along. But I certainly did, because I always wanted to be freelance. I
Yes.
really, really remember coming back from traveling around the world for a year after university and thinking, right, what job can I do that will give me a different story every day, just like when I was traveling? That's the feeling that I wanted
Wow.
to have in my life. And so I kind of did. And journalism really ticks that box. I mean, I think you've just got to be one of those people who just says yes to absolutely everything. And so I absolutely kind of said yes to everything. So I was 22 when I
Okay.
did my
Yes.
first food story,
All
and it
right.
was for you remember Bob Geldof did
Yes.
Live Aid.
Yes, I
And I was
remember.
sitting on a beach in Thailand during Live Aid. I was probably the only person in the world who didn't know that everybody was watching their televisions at that time, and I completely missed it. But when I got home, I heard about Live Aid, and I just wanted to do something. And I heard that Bob Geldof was going to do Sport Aid.
Ah,
So I decided to do my own event in South London. And
wow.
Bob Geldof got to hear about it. I went to the launch of Sport Aid, and he just went for me in a very Bob Geldof fashion and told me that I was doing the wrong thing. And I
Oh,
was a bit cross. And so I sort of, stood my ground, and I said, well, I think that I'm contributing to it. Anyway, he was totally right. He said, it's a global event. Everybody needs to be in one place. You're distracting from the main event. Anyway, a lot of people were taking pictures of us while we were having a row at this launch. And his PA was sort of behind me going like this. And I was going, what's the matter with her? What? Anyway, she meant give me a call. She came up to me afterwards, gave me her card and said, give me a
okay.
call. And I gave her a call the next day, and she said, Bob wants you to work with him. So he invited me to come and do the television for Sport Aid.
Wow. Uh-huh.
So the
Wow.
stories that I was doing, I mean, my very first story was in the Philippines, but it was about malnutrition in the Philippines.
Right.
And so it was a food story, although I mean, of
Yes.
course, if you're dealing with stuff like, you know, malnutrition, if you're
Yes.
talking about famine,
Yes.
it's a food story. I wouldn't have
Exactly.
necessarily seen it in that way. And I didn't call myself a food TV person or
Mm-hmm.
a food journalist at that point.
Right.
But I did, I was doing some pretty hard hitting stuff
Right.
in
Wow.
in my 20s. But and because you know what it's like, once you do that, then you're known as the person who's kind of good working
Right.
abroad. And when you're doing
Mm-hmm.
stories around food, there's not that many people doing stories around food,
Right.
particularly
Right.
at that time. And
Right.
so I was in a very small pond.
Yes.
and I learned very quickly, and I was thrown into a lot of, very big stories,
Stories. Yes.
and I learned quickly. So by the time I was 30, I'd been working kind of on food stories for a very long time, and so I was then
Wow.
offered a British TV show to work
Hmm.
on, and
Wow.
it just kind of goes from there.
Right.
There weren't many of us around working in,
Yes.
what British food has been like until
Yes.
very recently.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so there was very little to talk about on television in terms of food,
That's
number
true.
one, but also there were very few of us who were equipped to tell
Hmm.
these stories.
That's wow, that's so interesting. Yes, and like you said, I mean, you don't think of famine as a food story, but it is.
Of
It's
course.
totally a food story. And that's just I love that perspective, that switch in perspective, because we tend to forget that. And it's still there's still famine in the world, and we tend to forget that too,
Yeah.
especially
But
after COVID. Yeah.
well, exactly. And, so
Yeah.
I was always interested in the political and the
Hmm.
cultural significance of any food story. Just right from the very beginning, I
Yes.
made sure that that's what I was looking for, and I still do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, I know that, wow, food in general has changed quite a bit with COVID as well. And I remember, I mean, even, 2019, no one was really worried about where their food was going to come from. And I remember when COVID first hit, like not just toilet paper, but people were hoarding food. And I remember going to a supermarket and noticing there was nothing on the shelves. And because people were hoarding it as well. And I'm sure that was the same in the UK
It
as it
was.
was.
It
Yeah.
was. And people started cooking themselves,
Yes.
making
Yes.
bread and,
Yes.
exploring. I mean, we ran out of flour here.
Yes.
Can you believe it?
I can believe it. I think we were close to it here too because it was hard to get certain
Yeah.
supplies. I know my younger sister, she was in Japan during COVID, and she's a bread person, unlike me. She loves bread. So she started baking her own bread at home, like a lot of other people,
Yeah.
and she's perfected it quite well.
Yeah.
And now, even in she's in LA now, but she still bakes bread, and
But
yeah,
it's a
it's
really interesting response. I mean, it's a
hmm
very sort of survivalist
yes,
response. I will
yes,
feed my family with
yes,
bread and bread alone. We've been eating
yes,
bread as a staple for thousands of years. It
yes.
was really the first food. I mean, the
That's
word
true.
company comes from
Yes,
compane,
yes,
with bread.
bread.
Cultures, grew up around
Wow,
growing wheat.
great. Yes. Hmm.
And so for us to kind of instinctively kind of go back to that, and I will save my family by making bread, it was extraordinary, I found. But
I
it's
think
also
it.
to do with time,
Yes,
and
yes,
I'm sure a lot of people found it really fun to do with kids.
yes,
There's
yes.
a lot of reasons why people chose to make bread. I
Hmm.
think it's a wonderful story.
Yes, I think it's beautiful. And I mean, a lot of people that didn't even know how bread was made learned how to do
Yeah,
this. And I think it's beautiful. My sister, I mean, she did a lot of research. I mean, she always loved to cook and bake, but she did a lot of research on how to make different types of bread.
yeah,
And I know she and her husband enjoy a lot of the bread that she makes.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah. I was actually with her when I was in Tokyo just recently,
yeah.
and it's funny because I usually here in New York, I don't eat that much bread, um, only because it's hard to get really good bread here in the US.
Is it
I'm
really?
sorry.
Is
I'm
it
sorry,
really?
but US people, well, I grew up
New
well,
York?
growing up in Tokyo, you get really good bread.
You get milk
And
bread.
oh God, yeah. Oh, it is the
Oh
best.
my God, it really is
Uh,
amazing.
yeah. I mean, I grew up on that, and
Okay. Okay, fair enough.
And yeah, so, coming here to the US and expecting the same, you can't expect
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same. And
yeah,
then you try breads here that you could get like, in the supermarkets or just anywhere, right? Even some of the bakeries, and it's like, no, it's not the same. It's not the same. And I remember thinking that, and I'm like, oh, well, if this is the type of bread that I'm going to get, I don't need to eat bread here. So that's probably why I've turned more to whole grains here in the US.
Okay.
But
It's the
yeah,
artisanal sort of element
yes,
that is really taken off here. You know, in the UK,
yes,
we're very big on coffee and bread and,
yes,
you know, even tea a little bit.
yes,
You know, the kind of the real sort of understanding the terroir
yes,
of the flour for the bread and the mother, you know, the
yes,
kind of and the role of ferment in bread,
yes,
and then the wonderful stories of coffee and the coffee where it comes from and the terroir of that, but also of tea
yes,
and the whole story of food justice. And you know, there's a there's a lot to be said for the artisan, and a lot
yes.
of people really choosing that approach to eating because it's not just good for your gut; it's good for your soul.
Yeah, it is. And if any of our viewers would know this, but when you're forced to eat something you don't like, it just puts a damper on your soul, like you said.
Yeah,
And when you're eating things that you truly love and enjoy, I mean, when you're with family, you enjoy these certain foods. I know that, like, I remember my mom would make this lasagna that we used to love. I mean, this is a Japanese family that's eating lasagna, right? But I remember as a kid, my mom would make this, and we would all love it. And it was like, we just found so much joy in eating that and enjoying it. And I think a lot of the family dinners that we had, my mom was a pretty good cook, I'd say, and she would cook for us, and she would make these amazing things. And oh gosh, this is a funny story, but I was born in South Africa, and I guess the neighbor that they had next door, she was this older Jewish woman, and she taught my mother how to make Jewish food. So this is an Asian Japanese
wow,
woman making Jewish food. So
amazing. Well, like
she would
chicken
make,
soup.
yeah, she would make brisket. Oh my God. And yeah, this Asian lady here, she's like, I love brisket. I love all
Yeah,
this Jewish food. And I couldn't understand why until my mom told me this story. And I'm like, of course, that's because she learned it and she made it the way, it's supposed to be made.
yeah.
And everyone was like, why do you like Jewish food so much? And I'm like, well, probably because I grew up on it. And it's funny how
That's
food,
so
yeah,
interesting. I mean, I
yeah.
was interviewing a guy called Tim Spector who huge in this country now.
Mm-hmm.
He this will be backwards, but his
Mm-hmm.
he is a geneticist,
Oh,
and
okay.
he created so it's this guy. It's called Food for Life Cookbook, and
Okay.
so Tim Spector has created an amazing app called Zoe,
Okay.
which basically kind of gives you personalized nutrition
Mm.
all around your individual gut
Oh,
microbiome.
wow, that sounds fun.
And
Mhm,
my show, Cooking the Books, my
mhm.
podcast, takes 4 food moments, and I ask my guests to give them to me in advance. And his first food moment was about his mother's lasagna, and his
Ah,
mother was Australian, and she wasn't a gourmet at all, but he was talking about food and the association, food
yes,
memories basically. And
yes.
as a scientist, he says there is a direct relationship with the
Oh,
gut. I
yeah.
mean, you know, brain to belly, this is what you're all
Mhm.
about.
Yes.
But it was so interesting talking to, you know, one of the most famous
Wow.
scientists in Britain about food memories around lasagna.
That's
Um, you know, if I ask my kids what their favorite food, no, I'm the cook in the house. My husband loves to cook, not great at cooking. And I asked my kids what they would say is the family
Mhm.
signature meal, and one of them said lasagna. Dad's lasagna. I was like, what? And she later said, well, you're always cooking amazing things from different cookbooks all the time. And so everything's
Oh.
very different. There's no one meal that you cook.
Mhm.
They're all amazing, but Dad's makes his lasagna. The only thing Dad ever makes for us is lasagna.
That's funny. But I can understand that perspective.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, my dad wasn't a cook at all. He was of the generation that men were not supposed to be in the kitchen.
Oh, really?
So, yes, and being a he was the eldest son in a Japanese family.
Wow.
So, and he was born in 1917, 1918, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So it was of that generation where
Yeah.
men were not supposed to even step into the kitchen. So I remember he didn't know how to use the gas stove
Wow.
until he was probably in his 50s, until
God.
yeah, we were kids and he had to learn because my mom had to do something and he had to learn how to use it. So that's when he learned to use it. And I remember, yeah, he really learned a lot because my mom got ill at one point, and so he had to kind of learn a lot of that. And of course, he had myself and my sister, but still, sometimes he would need to do things. And so he learned, and he really put himself out there because, for a
Amazing.
man of that
Yeah,
generation
yeah,
to do that. And he would start, I mean, he didn't learn how to really cook or anything, but he could prepare food for himself,
yeah,
which to me is a big accomplishment for
yeah,
someone of that generation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm sure since you've heard about people's first food experiences, that you must have had some interesting stories from that. What
Oh,
was,
yeah.
yeah, what was one story that was very, that left a big impression on you?
From one of my guests.
Yes, if you don't
Well,
mind
they're not
sharing that.
always first food moments. They're
Okay.
always food
Food-
moments from their book. So the
Okay.
format of my show
Yes.
is, they'll take their book, which are very often, because they're food books,
Mm-hmm.
they're very often come from a family
Yes.
background. They'll
Yes.
talk about their first memories,
Mm-hmm.
and I ask them for their 4 food moments, so that and they're moments from the book that they talk
Right.
about the book, which
Okay.
gives us sort of a structure that we
Yes.
can then go through, and it works out to a 30-minute show. Um, and very often people will talk about their food moments. Tomorrow on the show, I've got the Queen's son, Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's
Wow.
son.
Wow.
And he was talking about his childhood growing up with Camilla,
Mm-hmm.
and you know she was, King Charles is very,
Yes.
very into his food, and he's a big
Yes.
champion of British food, and
Yes.
organic and regenerative
Organic,
farming.
yes.
He's a
Mhm.
really big champion of what we
Yes.
need to know about food, as is Tom. And Camilla had chickens when Tom was growing up.
Oh, wow.
And he said she was a good, simple cook, and he talks about how she made her roast chicken. But he said, actually, their normal shopping was in organic sort of fishmongers and butchers and farm shops, because that's what you got in rural Wiltshire
Yes.
when, he's sort of my age. So when he was 7 or 8, that's everything was
Yeah.
like that. It was before the
Mhm.
industrialization of the food
Right.
system.
Right.
And he said, the biggest food moment for him was when Sainsbury's came to town. And this massive supermarket, he said it was like something landing in Wiltshire from outer space. And the aisles
Wow.
and aisles of food.
That's
And the
true.
food were all, horrible things like Ice Magic and Mars bars and Coca-Cola and, Angel
Yes.
Delight and stuff that
Yes.
had nothing to do with any food whatsoever. But it was new and it was
Yes.
shiny.
Yes.
And he said that his mum, sorry, the Queen,
Y
um, she would say they could have once a week, they had fizzy day, and that's when they had
Okay.
Coca-Cola.
Wow.
Yeah, but it just it gives
It
such an insight, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, it does. Wow.
Instantly you're in that farmhouse in
Yes.
Wiltshire with these 2 little kids, Tom and
Wow.
his sister, knocking around, and the chickens and the beehives, and what seems like an absolute idyllic environment, but no, they want to go to Sainsbury's.
Wow. Wow. Well, there's something about said, there's something to be said about these big supermarkets.
Mm.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but here in New York, there's a supermarket chain that was originally in Rochester, upstate New York, Rochester, New York, called Wegmans. And they're a huge kind of, I remember, well, my ex-husband was from Rochester, New York. That's the only reason I know about Wegmans. But I remember walking into a Wegmans. This was in the 90s when they just opened in Rochester, and it was this big fancy supermarket with a gourmet section, and they had some prepared foods. They had the butchers, they had the artisanal breads and all this and that. And but you still had these little aisles of food and processed food, as well as like paper towels and household goods as well. And I remember walking in there from Japan. You're not used to something like that. And I'm like, wow, this is like a food department store
Yeah,
almost.
yeah,
And it was amazing. And I know that recently, Wegmans, I think just about a year or two ago, they came into New York, into the city, and they
wow.
have a supermarket here in the city. I have yet to go there, um, but yeah, it's been getting quite a bit of press, and a lot of people have gone there. And I think they do have fresh, their motto is fresh and artisanal.
Yeah,
So I think it's an interesting concept. And I remember, like, even these new stores, you're like, I want to go see what it's like because, well, I'm always curious about all these different things, and I'd like to know what's going on. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've just come
Wow.
back from France.
Oh,
Last week I was in France, well, for the
nice.
previous 2 weeks. And I forget every time I go to France. I go to France a lot because we don't fly. We go on these electric car road trips.
Oh, nice.
So France is easy for us. You go
Yes.
straight across the channel, you're there,
Yes.
and you just go to a different bit of it every time, and
Oh,
there's
nice.
so much to explore. You forget how huge France is. We haven't even started on Spain or Germany or Austria or anywhere else in
Wow.
Europe yet, but
Wow.
we will. But I'd forgotten about the supermarkets again, and I go in there and I was like, oh my god, this is absolute heaven. Yeah, in every big supermarket, and they are in every town, you
Oh,
have a
yes.
fishmonger and a
Mm-hmm.
butcher and a cheese shop and
Oh,
a bread shop and
yes.
I mean, you pick up those tomatoes and they could be in a marché in the village square.
Wow.
They are phenomenal. And I
Yeah.
put something up on my story on Instagram about the tomatoes. I just took a little film of all the tomatoes, the different
Oh,
colours.
gosh.
Oh God.
Oh,
And people went crazy, just
I'm
crazy. It's like,
sure.
oh
I'm
God, take
sure.
me to France now. Because it's like a
I could
whole
just taste
other
it.
ingredient. Yeah, yeah. And you can smell it too, can't you?
Yeah.
It's not like a normal
Oh,
ingredient.
gosh.
It's not nothing like the tomatoes you get here.
No, no, it's not. I mean, I remember talking to somebody about tomatoes, and I was like, here in the US, I was like, you want, I mean, I remember growing up and having a tomato, just, you wash it, get it from the farmer, you wash it, and you just sprinkle some salt on it, and you
Yeah.
bite into it, and
Yeah, yeah.
that sweet, tart, and juicy, you know, uh, taste, it's like nothing that you can't get it here anymore
You can't,
unless
but there's
it's
something
so.
about the tomatoes from the south of France
Mhm.
because of the sunshine.
Yes.
I've been growing tomatoes here, and I went to pick up the last lot yesterday, and I ate them literally out of the greenhouse,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, nice enough. Nothing like the ones I was eating there last week because you don't
I'm
get the
sure.
sunshine
That's true.
and
That's
the
true.
heat. That
Yes.
heat,
Yes. Yes.
tomatoes in August in France, nothing like it in the world.
Wow. Well, I can
Mm.
almost taste it. I'm like, now I want tomatoes, but I can't get it here, so that's okay. Um, but it's funny how we talk about food, and it's I've noticed that because, well, the supermarkets are great, but then also that we've gotten so used to these I'd say food products that look like a tomato or look like a banana or look like a certain vegetable, but they're not really, you don't really have the taste.
No.
I think food has changed so much over the years. And I understand that, commercialism, also industrialism, and all of that has changed it. And sometimes I feel it's a shame that we can't get the taste of the original food sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot of shame in it. I mean,
yeah,
what that tastelessness.
Yes,
is all about. Is that food chain is shocking. Is
it is.
shocking. I mean,
It
the people
is.
who, harvest those bananas, they don't get paid properly. The
No.
production, the packaging alone. Can you imagine what the packaging, the carbon footprint?
Yes.
I mean, every single at the price they put them on when it gets to the destination, the access that people who don't have enough money don't have to them.
Right.
Every step of the way is literally tasteless.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know if comparing it to this is weird, but I always think about how kids nowadays, I sound old when I say this, but kids nowadays, they don't know how to write cursive or they don't know how to read an analog clock or a
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah.
So if you say, if I have like if I say, oh, the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on 3, if that means 3 o'clock, some kids will be like, what are you talking about? Eh, or like, I would write something in cursive and I would give it to them and they're like, we can't read this. And it's just mind-boggling to me because I remember, I grew up here in the US and in Japan, but I remember here in the US, we would have these, oh God, we would have penmanship class, and you had the 2 big lines, rows of lines, and then you had the dotted line in the middle, and you had to kind of like perfect your cursive in
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we all did that. Yeah.
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 And, now to think that, kids nowadays don't even have to do that.
French kids do.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
you
love
still
hearing that.
see, we all have
That's
different personality in our
mhm.
writing. Well, actually, French kids are taught to write in such a special way that, they all pretty much look the same. It's a very specific, you can always tell a
Wow.
French child's writing. Mm,
Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that. Oh, that's something I wanna look into and
mm,
research because
mm,
it's fascinating to me. Yeah,
mm.
because I see, people's handwritings, like you see them, have them fill out a form and they fill it out with pen. And most people right now are in block letters.
Really?
Yes, yes,
Wow.
yes. And then when you have something in cursive, people can't read it.
Mind you, I can't read my own writing.
Well, I can't either, but that's a different story. That's a totally different story. I remember when I was in high school and I don't know why I'm telling you this story, but my history teacher would he would grade the papers and he had the most atrocious handwriting. And I remember I would have to decipher it. It was like deciphering a code. And I used to love deciphering it. And people would be like, can you read what he wrote? And I usually could, right?
Wow.
Because yeah, and because once you get used to their, it's like getting used to a language, right? Or a way somebody draws. So once you get that, you can read it. And I would read different people and said, "Oh yeah, he said this, this, this here." And they go, "Oh, really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah," because it was just so interesting how people's writings, yeah, it was funny how that was. And now I don't think even if it's graded, it's really, even if you grade it, it's in block letters.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I've seen a
Hmm.
lot of that, and which is quite interesting. So I'm just wondering, sometimes when I probably write something in cursive, if I don't want anyone to read it and understand it, then I should write it in cursive.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is like totally off topic. I don't know where I went with all this. Um, but yes, it's interesting how food has evolved though over the years. And I know that like even growing up, we used to when I grew up in Japan, there was a farmer that came around our neighborhood carrying his basket with, what he picked for the day or, that week. And we would always get this fresh vegetables and fruit. And it was really nice. It was really
Yeah.
nice. And I guess, I was very blessed to have had that experience because many people don't.
Yeah.
And to have had the experience of tasting what
Yeah.
real vegetables taste like.
Yeah. Well, we have a thing in this country. One of the food writers I've had on my show,
Mm-hmm.
B. Wilson, she created, when she was writing a book called First Bite, which
Okay.
is a wonderful book about, how we learn to taste. It's
Yes.
a fantastic book. And she did some research and found, I think it was in Finland or Sweden, there was a thing called, I forget what it's called now. Why do I forget? Sapere. And it was about taking taste into the classroom of the very youngest children to teach them how to taste. And so she's brought it here, and it's called Taste Ed, short for Taste
Uh-huh.
Education. And
Wow.
she's created a charity. It's really successful, and it goes into primary schools, and it
Wow.
doesn't put any pressure on the kids, but it
Mm-hmm.
just introduces them to the idea of tasting different flavors, different vegetables, different fruits.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
because, kids, really sort of respond to kind of peer, not
Yes.
pressure, but peer support.
Yes.
That if one of their friends is tasting something and responding to it, they'll have a go. And it's part of the curriculum now. I mean,
Wow.
it's not
I
in
love
every
that.
school, but in the curriculum, there's space to be able to
Wow.
bring a lesson like that in. And it really would change everything
Oh,
if
yes.
every
Mm-hmm.
child was given access to that sort of taste education.
Yes. Wow, that's amazing.
Mm. I mean, the
Yeah.
edible schoolyard as well is a wonderful thing,
Yeah.
and it came from your Alice Waters, in San
Yes.
Francisco, in
Yes.
Berkeley. The idea. And I remember Michelle Obama was going to bring this
Yes.
into office.
Discuss. Yes.
The edible schoolyard is a great idea, and we do use it a lot here in the UK, but just not enough.
Yes.
Um, Chefs in schools we also have, which is
Yes.
great way, but it's again just in primary school. None of this really happens very much in secondary school, and it's such
Yes.
a shame because that's where all the food issues kind of really set
Yes.
in.
Yes.
People are playing out who they want to be, aren't they, when they're teenagers, and they're kind of in the canteen, and food is
Yes.
symbolic of so much
Yes.
stuff. And
Oh gosh.
I interview a lot of food writers from different parts of the world who came
Yes.
here as immigrant
Mm-hmm.
children, and a lot of the Indian kids the Indian writers now grown up
Yes.
talk
Mm-hmm.
about how they felt ashamed of their lunchboxes.
Yes.
I mean, you
We get
Japanese
that
kids,
here.
your lunchboxes are works of art, aren't they? But and
True.
probably these Indian ones were too. Can you
Oh,
imagine
I'm
the
sure. I'm
slices of all
sure.
these beautiful stuff compared with some soggy tuna sandwich? But they
Yes. Or
felt
peanut
ashamed
butter
of
jelly.
yeah, but they felt ashamed of who they were
Yeah.
because it's different.
Yes. I hear that a lot here in the US as well. Um, yeah, wow, I didn't, well, no, my sister and I we would get different types of food. Yeah, we would get Japanese sometimes, and then we would get the soggy tuna sandwich as well because we wanted it as kids. We're like,
Yeah,
Mom, we want the tuna sandwich, right?
yeah,
And she would make it for us. But so we were very blessed that my mom was very open to different things, and she would do different things for us. And but I've heard of many kids who grew up here from immigrant families that said that they were really ashamed to open their lunch boxes, or they were, um, gosh, it was torment every day because they would
yeah,
get teased about their lunch
yeah. They would,
boxes.
because they would smell
Yes, it's a
and they would look
different smell.
different. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And, kids can be vicious to other kids that are different
yeah.
because I think it's just that, kids aren't taught that different is good. Different
Mm.
is the way that society is, and that we should all accept these differences as one. But, we're not taught that yet, I guess, as kids, or, well, it's not readily taught. That's another
Which is
thing.
crazy in
Yeah.
America, where
Yeah.
everyone is from a different background.
You would think, right? Yeah. I always think that. I was like, wait a minute, this country the US was founded on the concept of being a free country for because they were avoiding persecution from the UK, from the
Yeah.
England. So they came here to find freedom of religion, freedom of speech,
Yeah.
and yet it's
Yeah.
still,
It's
and
tribal. It's
yes,
hunter-gatherer stuff.
yes, it
It's
is
in our
very
DNA.
tribal. It is.
Don't be different. Don't stand out from the crowd. You'll be seen. You'll be hunted down. Yeah.
Yes, yes. There's a saying in Japanese that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And believe me, I've been at the hammered down end of the nail a
Yeah,
lot of
of
times.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but it's sad, but it's how life is, sadly, until more people are aware of different is good, and because being different is what creates innovation, and because that creates the newer things in our society, in our life. For instance, like we were talking about COVID, and if COVID didn't happen, we wouldn't have even had, there was Zoom around before that, but it wouldn't be as readily acceptable and available to people as it is now.
Yeah.
I was dealing in Zoom way before because of coaching platforms and things like that.
Yeah.
So I would always have like a coaching call or something like that. And before Zoom came into place, I think it was what was those free telephone calls. You call with different groups of people, things like that. But out of necessity, out of these different things that happen, new things happen for us, which makes life supposedly easier for us. And I
Yeah.
think it does in some ways. I mean, it's the way you look at it, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
completely. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember absolutely refusing to do any Zoom calls while I was working at Delicious.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked at Delicious for 4 years, and it kind of worked in my favor. I
Mm-hmm.
went to Nigella's house. I went to Jamie Oliver's office. I
Yes.
wanted to sit next to those people, and I
Yes.
sat next to lots of people, and I spent whole days with people that I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have done if I was on Zoom.
Right.
But actually, I listened back to the quality of those interviews compared with the quality of the interviews I do now. And obviously, I'm easier
Yes.
going with my celebrities, guests and stuff. Not that I was ever kind of not, because I was
Right.
always old enough to not feel abashed in any way.
Right.
But I do feel more comfortable now. I know what I'm doing a bit more.
Yes.
But actually, there's something about Zoom that is really intimate. Even here, right
Yeah.
now, we're chatting away as if you were right in front of me,
Yes.
and there is, you're in a tiny little square on my computer. I've just realized I could actually big you up, but I quite like you sort of in a little square
Yeah.
next to me.
That's okay. I like watching us together too. I don't know. There's something about just seeing one square instead of like seeing both of us, because
Yeah,
I feel like I'm having a real conversation with you. Like you're sitting across from a table with me and we're just
yeah.
enjoying coffee and having a conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and I've
yeah.
found that very often,
Yeah.
and in fact, I do Cooking the Books live now
Oh,
sometimes,
cool. Uh-huh.
and it is a very different dynamic. It's in front of an audience,
Oh,
and we get questions from the audience as well, and I
oh,
do some
that's nice.
festivals and all that sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and it's lovely and it's fine, and it's very different for me.
Yes.
I noticed that my guests will play to the crowd, for example,
Yes.
whereas you and I are just literally talking to each other. There may be
Right.
millions of people watching, which I
Yes.
understand there are, but it doesn't feel that way.
Yes.
I'm not playing to them. I'm only talking to you, and that feels
Very
really nice,
intimate.
really
Yes. Mm-hmm.
intimate, and
Yes.
really connected.
Yes.
So I think that Zoom has been a fantastic boon for journalism.
Yes. Yes. And I'm so happy that, I could do this because I mean, like I said, you're in the UK, I'm here in New York. We're totally different time zones.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can talk like this is just amazing to me. I remember the days when I had to make international phone calls, and that was like a big thing,
Yeah,
back
yeah, and it
then.
costs a lot of money
Oh
as well in
gosh,
those days.
yes, yes, it
Yeah,
did.
it's
Most of
it's
my
a it's a real gift.
back
Yeah,
in the day.
Fantastic way of connecting. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that, you get to meet all these different people that you normally wouldn't. I mean, your whole network and your whole world just opens up if you
Yeah.
let it.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an amazing thing. Like, if it weren't for, Facebook, if it weren't for doing that live interview I did with you, I never would have known about you.
Yeah. And now we're
And
connected forever.
I know, which I think is wonderful. Oh, and I just wanted to, I know that your daughter has dogs and you're very much into doggies. And I was
I
like,
have dogs.
yes. And I
Yeah.
was like, yes, because I was like, I knew I liked her. And the fact that she liked dogs, because I'm a dog person, total dog person.
Yeah.
If you know me at all, you know that the love of my life is my dog.
Oh, yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
she
Me
is
too.
just my life. But and I used to volunteer at an animal shelter for a while because this was right between two dogs. When I lost my first dog, or I had to put her down because of her age, she was 17. She was a black lab and greyhound mix.
Ah,
So,
gorgeous.
yeah, she was gorgeous. She was like a runway model with these long, long legs.
Oh, wow.
But, 17 is a long
Yeah, yeah,
time,
yeah,
and she said, "I'm ready to go," so,
yeah.
and, between, her after that, I was like, I didn't want another dog, so I said, "Let me get my doggy fix from by volunteering at an animal shelter." And I would volunteer at an animal shelter, and I would walk the dogs, clean the crates, all this and that, and, every time that a dog was, like, up for adoption, I was like, "Oh, I hope they get adopted, I hope they get adopted," and, gosh, it was such a great
God, I would
feeling.
have taken them all home. I couldn't possibly have done that.
Oh, you don't know, I was like, "Can I I really wanted to take all of them home, believe me. And I would be like, "It's okay, you're gonna find your forever home," you know? And they were, it's just, yeah, it was just such a joy to take care of them. And I remember when the puppies would come in and they were too small and too young to go on a walk. So you were allowed to carry them outside so that they could at least get the fresh air. And oh my gosh,
Ah,
I
heaven.
was in heaven. Oh my gosh. And I was like, "Can I take this one home? I want to take it home." You know? I have so many pictures of me with all these little puppies, thinking, "I'm gonna take this one home. I'm gonna take this one home." But never, that didn't happen. But no, but it was a good way for me to connect with the dogs, and it was good for my soul because I needed that. And it was a good way for me to transition into getting to the feeling that, yes, I want another dog that I could take care of,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
yes. So, sorry to totally go off topic onto doggies because that's one of my things, and, yeah, it's funny how things happen like that. I'm just a dog person, I've always been a dog person, had dogs growing up, and yeah, and when I saw that on your Facebook, I was like, "Yay!"
Yeah, yeah. No, I've always had dogs too. Always, all my life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just feel like they're angels here put on earth to,
they are.
guide us along
They
our
are.
lives.
And I will
Yeah.
be taking them for a walk straight after this.
Oh,
We have
likewise.
woods right behind our house, and
Oh,
we
nice.
have deer, and yeah,
Wow.
it's really amazing, and watching. I love watching. Most dogs are so sort of uh, removed from the original animal that a dog
Yes.
was, the wolf dog.
Yes.
But
Yes.
one of our dogs, she's only a year and a half, but she's sort of a Dalmatian-y kind of Labrador mix or whatever. And watching her hunt, I mean, she's never
Wow.
caught anything, and I don't think she would. But the way that she runs is just breathtaking.
Oh, I'm sure.
The beauty of the movement is
Yes. Yes.
extraordinary. And when she sees something and she jumps in that way, oh my God,
Yes.
she's like a panther. Oh, that's her just saying she wants to go for a walk.
Uh, well, we're almost done. Yes, I remember that. It's the beauty. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's something about the beauty in that even watching my, little one here, not little, but uh, she's like 40 pounds, 35, 40 pounds, but that's like what, 20, 25 kilos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, but just watching them run and just be their joyful selves,
Yeah.
it just takes me back to, you know, appreciating just feeling that joy of
Yeah.
just running, just, having a healthy body.
Yeah.
Um, and I do a lot of Facebook Lives while I'm walking my dog.
Yeah.
And, they're, it's called Small Bites on my Facebook group. But
Yeah.
I do these, and it's usually when I'm walking my dog. And because walking her helps me to meditate as well,
Mm,
and to think of the joy that I have walking her, and to be able to be healthy, to be able
mm,
to walk her and to enjoy the surroundings that I'm in.
yeah.
I'm fortunate I have a park that's nearby that's a beautiful park,
Yeah.
and I get to walk there. But even if I'm not in the park, just walking around the streets,
Yeah.
there are trees, just looking up at the sky, just appreciating all of that.
Yeah.
It always brings me back to that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
to take it back to a food
Yes.
thing, well, no, because I mean, when I'm watching Polly run, I'm thinking about how lucky she is. They both came from a rescue
Shelter.
center in
Hmm.
Greece, um, and I work for Compassion World Farming as well. One of my clients, I do podcasts for lots of different clients, and
Yes.
Food Foundation being one of them. And it's all about food insecurity in people, but
Yes.
Compassion is about animals.
Yes.
And it's, they want to end factory farming, and
Yes.
they do lots of stuff about why animals should be allowed to exhibit their natural characteristics. And watching Polly run, I just think about, pigs.
Yes.
Pigs are like Labradors.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so, so important to think about where you get your animal, your meat
The
from.
meat. I
If you're
agree. Yes.
if you're the meat from that you get comes from an animal that has had a happy life,
Yes.
then that is the only way. And how anybody could eat anything that has been in a cage, has been confined all its life, that's been grown on hormones, and it's full of water, and been fast grown chickens, so grown so fast they break their legs. You know, that's what my dogs remind me of every single
Right.
day.
Yeah.
The ability to exhibit your natural characteristics is so important.
It is. It is.
And I will be, banging that drum for as long as I
That's
have to,
that's
because as the food industry gets more and more industrialized, fewer and fewer people ask those questions. I'm probably the only person I know who goes into restaurants and say, where does the beef come
it's
from? And
come
they go,
from.
what? Well, I don't know. I said, well, would you mind asking your chef? And they come back and the chef says, oh, Sussex Farms. We live in Sussex. What? Which Sussex Farms? I need to know that stuff. I
Yeah.
will not eat meat that
I
does not come from a responsible source.
Well, I think if anyone experiments with this, and this is a luxury, I know, but if you taste food or meat that's been through the factory, the grocery store meat, let's say, for example, it's from an animal that was under so much stress, and that's the meat that you're eating. And then when you get it from a happy animal, or a more humane type of meat, the taste, even if it's the same
Tastes so
meat,
different.
it tastes so different
Well, you know
because
why, don't you?
yes,
Because of the adrenaline going
paranoid.
through the
Yes,
veins of an animal that's been
exactly.
stressed.
Yes,
And an animal that has been transported live, probably across countries, if you live around here,
uh, yes,
um, and is that with every time the truck kind of goes around a corner, and they're driving fast, there's adrenaline being shot through
yes,
um, their their veins, and it
yes,
tastes terrible.
yes,
It tastes
yes,
terrible. I mean, I
yes.
don't think it's a luxury to be talking about this. I think
Okay.
that if you can't, if you don't, if you a lot of people eat meat every day,
Yes,
and they
that's true.
shouldn't.
Yeah.
Not if it's been kept in cages.
Yes. Um, and sadly, we're getting onto this juicy topic, but we are up on time, so we have to wrap up. So, Julie, could you tell us where we can, a few words, and also where we can find you on social media
Yeah,
if we want
I'm
to reach
Gilly.
out?
I'm GillySmith.com. I got in there early with the internet, so got a website about 25 years ago. GillySmith.com. I'm Gilly Smith on Facebook. I'm Gilly Smith on LinkedIn. I'm at Food Gilly Smith on Instagram, where I'm to be found most.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
me. And
Wow.
Cooking the
And
Books. Cooking the Books
okay.
with Gilly Smith is my
Yes.
podcast. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie. I wish we had more time to talk and discuss, but we have to wrap up here now.
Yeah, well, thank you
Uh,
so much for having me. It's been
oh,
fun.
thank you. I had such a great time talking with you. Um, so, thank you, and we'll have Julie back on our show at some point for sure to continue our discussion. And so, thank you, viewers, for watching today. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thank you.